The New York Times calls him arguably the chief ideologist of the Silicon Valley elite. Marc Andreessen on Uncommon Knowledge now. Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. After growing up in New Lisbon, Wisconsin, which has a population today of 2,523, Marc Andreessen majored in computer science at the University of Illinois and then moved west. In 1993, Mr. Andreessen co-founded Netscape, which made available the first widely used browser, almost instantly making him a major figure here in Silicon Valley, and he has remained a major figure ever since. In 2009, Mr. Andreessen and his investing colleague Ben Horowitz launched the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz, which today has more than $40 billion under management. Here at Stanford, Mr. Andreessen participates in the Hoover Institution's Emerging Technology Review. Since the election last November, Mr. Andreessen has been spending only half his time here in Silicon Valley, spending the other half at Mar-a-Lago, where he has been advising Donald Trump and his friends, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. Marc Andreessen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Peter. It's great to be here.
Okay, Marc, let's begin by taking a brief look at a video.
It's morning again in America.
Oh, there we go.
And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
Makes the hair on the back of your neck go up.
It's still powerful, isn't
So
it?
sorry, was that 80? Is that 80?
That's 84. That's the
84,
re-election
okay, re-election.
campaign. So the 1970s, a decade of economic stagnation, the erosion of our position in the Cold War, the national humiliations of Vietnam and Watergate. Then Reagan is elected, and by 1984, the economy has begun to expand. We've begun to rebuild our military. There had been a rebirth of patriotism. And that video, although it may look sappy to us today, rang true enough to the American people that they gave Reagan 49 out of 50 states when they reelected him in 1984. Serious question, a national renewal. Can we do it again?
I mean, I see no reason why we can't. We have to want to. You know, we had. I was a kid when that. I was 13 when that came out, so I only had a vague awareness of what was going on. But we certainly can. I mean, look, we have the preconditions for all of it. We have the people. We have everything. We have the people. We have the resources. We have the geographic security. We have all of these capabilities. I mean, it's actually amazing if you look right now. We are the major Western economy that's growing, right? So like the UK and Germany and Canada, they've stopped growing, and they're probably shrinking, right? And so like we've continued, notwithstanding all of our many issues, we've continued to grow. We continue to be the beacon of capitalism and enterprise and entrepreneurship. The smartest people in the world definitely 100% still want to come here. You know, we're now leading the world in AI, like and then energy, like we have it's this running joke. It's like every time there's like one of these doom, headlines of, the U.S. is going to run out of, some rare earth mineral or lithium or something. It's like, the joke is like some farmer in North Dakota stumbles over like a new $2 trillion deposit in his backyard. Like we have apparently unlimited natural resources. Like there's no, like we have, overwhelmingly the dominant, military machine in the world. Like for all of our issues, we have all the preconditions for a, golden age.
A golden age.
Yeah.
All right. We'll come back to that. In the meantime, you have some explaining to do. The presidential candidates Marc Andreessen has supported. This is all public. I did a little research on you, Marc.
Yes.
I mean, you may have tried to tidy things up. You being you, I doubt that you have, but this is still very much on the record.
Hold on, I got to hack Wikipedia. Okay, go ahead.
Bill Clinton,
Yes.
Al Gore,
Yes.
John Kerry, Barack Obama,
Yep.
Hillary Clinton,
Yep.
and Donald Trump.
Well, a brief detour to Mitt Romney.
Brief detour to Mitt Romney. All right.
In 2012, but yes, yeah, but that trajectory exactly from actually, I mean, I sort of entered business in '94, but I knew Bill Clinton and Al Gore quite well and supported them in '96, and then Gore, as you said, Gore in 2000, all the way up to Hillary in '16.
Okay,
Yep.
So from a very loyal Democrat
Yep.
to a MAGA Republican, how come? What happened?
Yeah. So things changed. So the way I describe
You
it,
changed or things changed? So I'm wondering what in your thinking changed, and what I mean, there are plenty of people who say, I didn't leave the Democratic Party left me. Ronald Reagan used to say that.
Yeah.
So how does that, Environment and thinking, both of them. Comment, would you please?
By the way, it is amazing how many members of the key Trump team are former Democrats, right? Donald Trump is a former Democrat. Bobby Kennedy, you go right down the list, Tulsi Gabbard. There's a lot of these people. So there's a broad-based phenomenon. But anyway, so we'll talk about that. So the way I describe it is, look, I came up in the 90s. I grew up in the Midwest. I have sort of very firm kind of understanding memory of what it's like to kind of grow up in a sort of the polar opposite environment of California.
Right.
But I moved to California. I became a full-blown Californian, fully assimilated, adapted. But the way I would describe it is, it was just sort of assumed that if you were in Silicon Valley in high tech in the 90s, it was just assumed, Clinton-Gore heyday, it was just assumed that there was what I now call the deal with a capital D. And nobody ever said it out loud, but it was just assumed.
Right.
And the deal was, you can be a high-tech entrepreneur, you can build all this amazing technology, you can build a successful company, you can create lots of jobs, the technology makes the world a better place. It's great. You take the company public, you make a lot of money. At some point, you take the money and you donate it to philanthropy. And that's the total arc. And then when you die in your obituary, it's like he was an entrepreneur and a philanthropist, and all of his,
the Silicon Valley circle of life.
The circle of life, right. And it's just like, it's great. You get it was a great deal, because it's like you get to do what you want. You get all the material benefits. You get all the professional satisfaction out of executing in your field. You get all the material satisfaction out of financial success, and then you get all the psychic, moral satisfaction out of.
And the government leaves you alone. You have more than enough scope to do what you need to do as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, well, and that, and also, as you may recall, the Clinton-Gore administration was extremely enthusiastic about high tech.
Yes.
And so I have 1,000 stories from those days, but one is I was actually one of my little claims to fame. I was the third wheel in the first presidential webcast. So Bill Clinton and I did the first presidential webcast, presidential internet town hall. I think in 1996, and it was like a big deal in those days to do that.
Right,
He could not, and he called me afterwards, and he was just completely thrilled by the whole thing. It was so fantastic. And of course, Al Gore literally, he got a lot of flack later for
saying that he invented the internet.
Well, but this is the thing, is he never actually. So here I'll defend Al Gore's honor.
Okay.
He never said he invented the internet. He said he took the lead in the Senate in helping to create the internet, which is actually true. He was the sponsor of the legislation in the 80s that created what was known as the NSF-Net, National Science Foundation Network, which became the internet. That is the internet backbone, and then also the National Supercomputer Centers, and I bring it up because that's how I was able to do the work that I did, which is by the time I showed up at Illinois, we had the National Supercomputer Center and the NSF-Net backbone that he had funded.
And it was very important to your work that those things already existed.
Yeah, they had to. Those were the preconditions for everything that followed. And so Al Gore, I think deserves tremendous credit for what he did. But the point is, he was super enthusiastic about it and has always been a giant supporter of technology.
Right.
And so these people just thought that it was just absolutely fantastic. And then, Democrats all the way through the 2000s, as the Democratic Party started to clearly move left, Obama was still generally a big supporter of tech and American business. And, he liked what we were doing. And then if you may remember in 2012, I don't know if you remember in 2012 at the time, Obama's re-election, it was the headlines were all, this was the first internet election, first social media election. And it was the headlines literally were social media saves democracy. Because social media is what caused Obama to be able to raise so much money online and to be able to beat, the evil fascist Nazi Mitt Romney, right? And so literally the press was glowing in support of social media. Facebook was great for democracy, the whole thing. By the way, the Arab Spring also happened at the same time. And again, universal positive press coverage. So up until 2012.
So to your point,
go ahead.
You remind me of something. I knew somebody who was a very close friend of Mitt Romney and who was an investor out here in Silicon Valley. And Romney said the Obama operation is killing us on tech, and in particular campaign tech. Apparently the Obama people had it all sorted out so that they could give volunteers a piece of software on their smartphones. They could go door to door and ask 5 questions, and they would know whether that person was already supporting Obama, so you don't spend more money on him, or committed to Romney, so you don't spend money on, or a maybe in which you want resources. And the Romney people had nothing like that. And my buddy's job was to come out here to Silicon Valley and recruit engineers to build something for Romney. And engineers wouldn't work for the Republican.
Right.
It was so uncool.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yes, no question. So
you're not remotely surprised by that story.
Well, this goes back. So the long arc here is Silicon Valley. There was a big Republican contingent in Silicon Valley in the chip era,
right?
50s, 60s, 70s, and so by the time I got here, there were these guys who were mostly retired at that point, who were kind of the
David Packard worked for Richard Nixon as Deputy Defense Secretary, as I recall.
So these guys were already in their 70s and 80s. I met some of them, but I didn't know a lot of them. This is sort of the transition of Silicon Valley from chips to software was kind of that handoff.
Right.
By the time I got here, basically everybody below the age of 50 was a Democrat, right? Which sort of foreshadowed the future of the state, right? as the state was going through its transitions. And so, so basically, and basically everybody I knew bought into the deal. Like essentially everybody I knew did this. And by the way, it's a tremendously heady thing to buy into, to become part of, because it's just like, it's amazing. You're like this incredibly lionized tech founder. You're getting invited to the White House. Everybody loves you. By the way, the press loves you. It's all great. The philanthropy, they love you for that. Like the whole thing is just like this odd, and you get to Davos and Aspen, and
you get to get rich and have your vanity flattered.
It's amazing.
Okay.
And the government, by the way, and the government is supporting you, right?
Right,
and if you have a problem, and there's like a problem in a foreign country, and they're like, coming at you on something, or there's some crazy tax or something, the U.S. government will actually go to bat for you. Or if there's some weird trade war thing or whatever, your stuff gets seized at some port, the State Department will step in, and so the government's like on the side of American business. And and this was the trade. In retrospect, this was the trade that the Democrats made in the 90s, right? To become pro-business. This is sort of a reflection of how Clinton brought the Democratic Party back from the craziness of the 60s and 70s, was to get them in a point where they were not literally fighting capitalism. Right, every day. And so it worked great. The meshing was great, and the meshing basically worked great up until 2012, and then basically it was after Obama's reelection. Really, what I picked up, my experience was starting in 2013 is when things really started to unravel.
Okay, and so how do you pick it up? You're in 2013, well, as I said, you've been a major figure in Silicon Valley, famous man, wealthy man since the 90s. How do you pick it up in 2013? You're investing and you discover your entrepreneurs are starting to run into difficulties they didn't used to run into. There's something more vague than that. There's a vibe. Describe what it felt like. What are you picking up in 2013?
So in retrospect, I was on the front end of picking up I didn't understand what was happening, but I was on the front end of picking up the change. I felt it. And the reason I felt it is because I was so involved in the consumer internet companies of that era, and in particular the social media companies. And so I was on the Facebook board. I was an angel investor in Twitter, an angel investor in LinkedIn. I was involved in all these, basically all of these companies, all these social media companies. And I was super close. I knew YouTube inside out, and so I sort of knew how all these things operated. I knew all the people, and I was in the room for a lot of the conversations. And basically, it was in 2013 is really like when the employees started to activate. And so you started to get basically this employee activist movement like that, and that was a big thing. And of course, in retrospect, I know what happened, which is you had a generation of radicalized college kids, sort of from basically. So basically, if you back up further, it was basically some combination of like 9/11, the Patriot Act, and then the Iraq War, and then the global financial crisis, and then Occupy Wall Street. Whatever happened during that sort of 10-year period radicalized the college kids before they moved into industry, but then they showed up and they were starting to populate these companies in 2012, 2013, 2014. And then they activated a lot of their older contemporaries in those companies, the older cohort members who wanted to be cool and with it. And we know this. It
started with the kids then.
It started with the kids, and the very specific thing that happened with the social media companies is that was the beginning of the whole thing with hate speech and misinformation. And so that was the whole thing, because up until then it was the internet is a wild west. We love it because it's a wild west. It makes all these things possible. It's fantastic. It's great. It's working. It's pro-democracy. It's pro-free speech. The State Department, the Obama State Department had this like giant push to expand free speech right all through the rest of the world. Right at the same time that they discovered it would be a really good idea to censor American speech, right, on social media, right? So there was this amazing. Do you remember net neutrality?
Yes.
This big push from the left to make sure that big companies couldn't censor internet speech. and so there were years and years and years of anybody who was on the side of censoring internet speech was against net neutrality and was the Antichrist. And then literally that flipped and became anybody who wasn't pro-internet censorship was the Antichrist. And net neutrality vanished as an issue. The two issues that have vanished completely from the political stage are net neutrality and money in politics. They're just gone as like mainstream left-wing issues. They're just, it's money in politics is after Hillary outspent Donald Trump 3-1 and lost. That was it for the anti-money in politics issue. Right. So there's this term in Hollywood, retcon, where you do retroactive continuity. You go back and you sort of change a story so that it's all consistent later. And so there was the free speech retcon, there was the net neutrality retcon, there was the money in politics retcon. Anyway, so this all kicked off in 2013. I was in the room at some of these companies for the original discussions on define hate speech, define misinformation. Of course, assurances were, everybody was like completely confident that these were very, straightforward, easy things to define. And of course, they wouldn't, begin a long slide towards political censorship. Which is precisely what happened. But this is really important. That slide started in 2013. That started before Trump. That started way before the primary process. That started way before the general election. It really kicked off then.
Got it. So what did you make of Trump first time around?
Like so this is the thing is, I'm reading the New York Times, I'm watching MSNBC, like I'm like anybody else, like in my class and station, and I'm just like absolutely horrified and like, oh my God,
That man is an outrage.
what about the norms, right? Like the whole thing, and like I said, I supported Hillary in 2016, and and frankly, my thought at that point was traditional awful is better than radical awful. And so like when push comes to shove, and look, like and Hillary, look, like Bill Clinton, I thought had been great, and like I said, and for tech he'd been super enthusiastic, and so I'm like, how presumably his wife was, and then basically, relatively quick, well, not relatively quick, it took a few years, but certainly by 2018, 2019, I was starting to really wonder what was going on, because things started to get really weird, as all through tech, and then basically after 2020, and the last 4 years have been completely insane. And if I had not already figured out which way was up by 2018, 2019, certainly the last 4 years did it.
You had enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's jump to the present. DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, your buddies, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, are heading it, and you yourself are participating as, you've called yourself an unpaid intern.
Yes, correct. Yes.
You may go get me a glass of water at some point.
Yes.
Let's start with a very brief video. And this is a video that Elon Musk retweeted. To my surprise, it turns out to be a couple of minutes of an old interview I did with Milton Friedman.
Yes.
So here we go.
14 is a lot for television, so I want to just go right down the list quickly and have you give me a thumbs up or thumbs down.
These are on
Keep them
cabinet
or abolish
agencies.
them? Department
Cabinet
of
departments.
Agriculture.
Abolish.
Gone. Department of Commerce.
Abolish.
Gone. Department of Defense.
Keep.
Keep it from 14 departments down to four
its basic
and a half.
fundamental
4.5.
functions. What are its fundamental functions? Preserve the peace, defend the country.
All right.
Provide a mechanism whereby individuals can adjudicate their disputes. That's the Justice
Department.
Protect individuals from being coerced by other individuals. The police function.
Right.
And now, this is both the central government and the state and local governments. The police function is primarily local and central.
Right.
And those are the fundamental functions of government, in my opinion.
Okay. So, as I said, Elon Musk, there I sat with Milton Friedman in the 1990s and asked him to go through the cabinet departments, and he whittled them down from 14 to 4.5. And Elon Musk retweeted that under the heading, the DOGE agenda. Okay, now, I'd like to ask about the DOGE agenda, but let me let you in on a little secret. When Ronald Reagan ran in 1979, he called for the abolition of the Department of Education, which, by the way, only got up and running in 1979. So it's not as if this thing was some storied inheritance from the gloried past in American history. Nothing. It was a brand new federal bureaucracy. And when Ronald Reagan took office, Ed Meese, who is the person who told me this story, went up to Capitol Hill and encountered one Republican senator after another who said, you can't do that. In just a year, they had already figured out how to use that cabinet department to give benefits to their constituents, and now they wanted to protect it, not eliminate it. All of which is to say, what do you boys think you can actually get done at DOGE? High spirits, huge intelligence is about to smack into practical politics.
Yeah. So, and as you may know, you probably also know there was a Clinton-Gore initiative called Reinventing Government that was also very. Do you remember this?
Dimly.
Rigo? There was a famous moment where Al Gore went on David Letterman when he was the top late night talk show host, and he went on with one of these famous. He went on with his $600 shatterproof Pentagon ashtray,
which they call ash receivers tobacco desk type.
But this is a quality item.
Yeah.
Right, the $3 ashtray that costs $600, and it's shatterproof, so you can operate in military zones. And of course, he went on there with his safety glasses and a hammer and proceeded to shatter on Letterman's desk, right? And say, the game is up, and we're going to go cut all this. And then, of course,
Didn't happen.
Well, to give it a little credit, the budget did balance. They did get to a balanced budget at some. They got into surplus for a brief period, so maybe some stuff happened. Reagan did some stuff. Although, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the government was bigger when Reagan left office.
Well, I can tell you a little bit about that.
Yeah.
So Reagan, as you know, this is one of the things that we're going to come to here in talking about DOGE. There is the discretionary budget. That is the bit that the Congress gets to vote on every single year. The Pentagon is a big part of that. Reagan was able to hold, and these days the discretionary budget is a little under 1/3 of the entire federal budget.
Yeah.
So overwhelmingly, it's welfare programs, Medicare, Social Security is the big one. Yeah. Reagan was able to hold the discretionary budget to about 1% growth over 8 years, which in real terms was a minor cut.
Right.
But that was huffing and puffing and constant labor. And what he could never get control of was the non-discretionary budget, which of course had been legislated in years past and grew according to, neither he nor Congress had any control over that, which is going to be a problem for you boys.
Right.
Okay,
Yes.
So there's that. There was also, I can remember this because I wrote speeches for it in the old. There was also a government commission on waste, fraud, and abuse. Peter Grace, J. Peter Grace, a very distinguished, very lovely man, very distinguished New York banker of a kind that this generation is gone, just like David Packard, belonged to an earlier era. And of course, he hired people and they went around and discovered all kinds of absurdities that the federal government was paying for. There was some sort of national program for beekeepers or something.
Right.
But it only was waste, fraud, and abuse if you looked at it the way Mr. Grace looked at it, which was as a businessman and a citizen. Right. If you looked at it the way a politician running for re-election looked at it,
right.
It wasn't waste, fraud, or abuse. It was very effective in buying votes.
Right. Right.
And so that stuff went almost nowhere as well. So what you boys are up to now has been attempted, although I must say, not with quite this level of bravado.
And not with Elon.
And not with Elon.
Not with Elon. So I would start by saying I'm not a spokesperson for the DOGE, so I'm not gonna represent.
I just want to know what you think.
I'm just gonna give you my views.
Elon Musk and Vivek are both very capable of speaking for themselves.
Let them speak for DOGE. So yeah, so look, number one is, people have taken swings at this in the past. That's certainly true. The factors you described are certainly true. Having said that, there are some differences. And so one is, it's a whole bunch of things to talk about, but one is, there's sort of three, the way to think about it is there's like three threads here. There's headcount, there's spend, and those are related but different,
Right.
separate threads, and then there's regulations. And then there's an intertwining of the three of them that has become salient as a result of the recent Supreme Court decisions on executive authority and on the so-called Chevron deference.
Right.
So there's been a set of Supreme Court decisions recently in which the power of the executive branch to basically have agencies that promulgate their own regulatory regimes and then staff and spend against those regulatory regimes without, basically being expressly authorized by Congress to do that. Like the Supreme Court, basically just made that decision that now is something that can be used to turn these things off. An argument.
I haven't, in all the press,
Yeah.
I haven't yet noticed that DOGE was paying attention to the end of Chevron deference.
Yes, correct.
That you guys have cottoned on to that and
Yeah.
intend to make use of it.
Yeah.
That decisions get made by Congress
Yes.
and the President of the United States and not by federal agencies.
Yeah.
That's huge. Congratulations.
In
fact, let's end the show right now.
So to start with, by the way, I give Vivek a lot of credit on this, and so
Good for him.
Vivek has talked
Good
about
for
this
him. Okay.
publicly, and there's some excellent legal scholars who are around the DOGE process who are contributing to this. So like an argument, and I think it's a very serious argument. An argument is if there is an agency that is either itself should not exist, which we'll come back to in a second, or if there's activities at the agency that should not be happening, or there's regulations that the agency is enforcing, there is I think, very strong argument to be made that it is actually necessary for the executive branch to stop doing those things in order to come into compliance with the Supreme Court rulings.
Oh, excellent.
Right.
Oh, excellent.
Which is the opposite.
Oh, excellent.
Which is the opposite valence of what everybody assumes. Right?
Yes,
Which is
yes,
you're making some radical corrective change. It's like, no, we're doing what we're literally required to do.
You just flipped the burden of evidence.
flipped the
burden of proof, I should say.
Burden of proof, exactly. Right. And of course, the Chevron, these Supreme Court decisions have had no effect like that up until now. But that's of course because this last administration has had no desire at all.
Right. They wanted a new Supreme Court.
Yeah, exactly. But this administration has the opportunity to do this differently. Pop quiz, Peter. How many federal agencies are there?
Too many?
Yes.
127 is some figure I read someplace.
No, it's like in the range of like 450 to 500.
Are you serious?
There is a claim going around.
There are now 15 cabinet departments. I looked that up after seeing this.
Well, we have this new innovation. I don't know when it came out in the last decades. The concept of an independent agency.
Oh yes.
And like, I've read the Constitution.
Independent of everything, including the Constitution of the United States. It's outrageous.
I've read the Constitution, and there is no provision in there for an independent agency. By the way, there are executive branch agencies that have their own internal courts.
Yes.
They have their own judges. I've read the Constitution. That's nowhere in there.
Correct.
Right. And so there's a rumor going around. I don't know if it's true. There's a rumor going around that nobody actually knows the number of federal agencies. That there's no actual individual person who actually knows the answer. One is because there's just so many of them, and there's new ones created every year. But the other is we have all these fuzzy things now. The CFPB is like the canonical example right now. We have these sort of
CFPB is the Consumer
Finance Protection Board,
established by Senator Elizabeth Warren.
It's sort of considered Warren's agency. Yeah, exactly. And it is nominal. I don't know the exact legal terminology, but it's nominally an independent agency under the supervision of the Federal Reserve.
Right. She wrote the legislation specifically so that no president of the United States could fire the director of the whatever it's called, CFPB. Which is unconstitutional on the face of it.
On the face of it, unambiguously. It's still a unit of that. I don't know if that happened. I don't know the exact state of that, but it's a unit of the Federal Reserve. The constitutionality of the Federal Reserve has always been a very interesting question.
Correct.
The ability for the president.
You're good. I'm really okay.
These are interesting. And I'm not saying these are easy answers, but these are important questions. Right.
Just asking the questions gets you a long way.
Yes, exactly. And so you have all of the, and you know this, like you have all, these are the same issues that come up when people talk about like special prosecutors and all these things, which is just like, all right, it's, it may be a good idea in theory, it's literally not in the Constitution. What are we doing? Right. The Constitution is very clear. The president's the chief executive, the chief law officer of the United States. There is no provision in there. So anyway, so there are all of these agencies and components of the government that have just sprawled out. Basically, a friend of mine, Curtis Yarvin, has this great line. He says, "We are living under the 80-year evolution of FDR's personal monarchy, but without FDR, right?" And so, because FDR, of course, is the guy, with the New Deal, and so he turned the federal government from this, basically this small overlay thing into this giant sprawling bureaucracy, and then it basically has continued to expand and morph and mutate under its own power. And anyway, so we do seem to have a Supreme Court that wants to, kind of pull this back in. So yes, there's an opportunity to do this. The DOGE team has, I think, very clever ideas on all three of the threads that I described: on spend, on headcount, and on regulation. I'll just give you one example: headcount. So the federal government. Well, here's another pop quiz: this is how many people work for the federal government?
How many people work for the federal government? So as I recall, the Pentagon is a uniformed force of about 2 million and another 1.5 million civilians. And then the federal government, actually the head count hasn't expanded that much for 20 or 30 years, as I recall. It's about 2.5 or 3 million in Washington, D.C., civilian bureaucrats. Is that right?
How many contractors?
Oh, no. Okay. Unknown. Unknowable.
Unknowable. There are estimates that are very high. I won't wing numbers off at the fly, but the estimates of the numbers are much higher.
Right.
So anyway, so then just sort of fun fact, which is like, what's the occupancy rate of federal buildings in Washington, D.C. right now by people working in the office?
Something like 25%, isn't it?
It's like 25% on average.
Lower than San Francisco.
Yes, it's basically that. Washington, D.C. federal building complex is basically a ghost town. The security agencies are still full time. The other agencies are not. And the extreme cases, you have certain agencies that are all the way down to a day a month. And there were this is true. There were collective bargaining in some of the agencies. This is the other thing: is in some of the agencies, the employees are unionized at the federal level, and there were collective bargaining agreements struck in some of these agencies where they literally during COVID got the right to never come back to work. And in one of the ones that I'm aware of, an agency I know well, they literally come back to work a day a month. And so what the employees do is they come back a day a month, but they pair the days, and so they come back for 2 days every 2 months.
Wow.
And so, and it's just like, and you ask any CEO in corporate America, like, how is this whole thing going? What are your employees doing? When they're in, every CEO will tell you, like, are these people, like, what on earth is happening? Are these people working? And so does the President of the United States have the legal authority to order people back to work? Does it count to be an employee of the federal government if you're not in the office?
Okay,
and so there's
all of this is just beautiful.
There's a ton of threads like that they're going to plan to throw.
All this is beautiful, really, truly beautiful. However, DOGE is an advisory commission.
True.
I believe this is the way the president has set it up, as an advisory commission. It has its sunset date.
Yes.
It ends on it goes out of business on July 4th, 2026.
That's right.
I'm very happy. I like sunsetting anything to do with the federal government. Yeah. But where do you and Elon and Vivek get the authority to make anybody do anything, including Congress to pass enabling legislation, including the president to write executive orders? Right. Or, given what little background I have in Washington, what I immediately, before you can get John Thune, the majority leader in the Senate, to introduce legislation, he'll have political people looking at all the political ramifications, and there's going to be some senators say, "Oh, I don't know, that you stepped on the toes of my constituent here," and the politics is going to start at you guys.
Right. So I'll give you one more.
How do you get stuff actually done?
Can I give you one more first, and I'll answer the
Please.
question? So I forget the exact term, but there's a legal term. So the Constitution authorizes, it says Congress authorizes money for the executive branch to spend. There's I forget what rescission is. It called the rescission? There's a legal term that basically means that the executive branch is also not allowed to spend less than Congress appropriates.
True. Which is what I have a recommendation, which is that you look at the 1974 legislation that removed from Richard Nixon, or it removed because of Richard Nixon, the ability of the president, which at that point had been traditionally accepted, to impound funds.
That's right, impoundment.
We want more impoundment. We want to get back to impoundment, correct?
Right, impoundment, yes, impoundment, I forget which way it goes, but impoundment is the concept that the president legally is required to spend the money that's appropriated. The president is not allowed to save money.
Right.
The president is not allowed to spend less money than Congress has appropriated. Once
Right.
again, if you read the Constitution, it doesn't say that.
Right.
This has been an issue of significant constitutional debate over the last 40 years, literally since that happened, and there have been, Wikipedia's big, there's lots of arguments back and forth on this.
Right.
I don't know if this is the kind of thing that the Supreme Court would look at. might be a good idea, right? So,
but the president of the United States, I mean, you don't have to be a genius in political science to construct the argument, which is that there's only one man or woman, one person who faces the entire country in an election, and therefore can be said to represent a national, as opposed to all these little parochial interests, a national interest in an overall ceiling on the federal budget, and that is the president of the United States, correct?
Yeah, so that's the answer.
Okay.
So that's the answer. And the answer, and by the way, to be clear, I'm not DOGE, I'm an unpaid intern.
Yes, but we're having fun, Mark. Let's the details.
Tech and Leland are running it, and then it itself is not getting set up as a permanent agency.
Right.
You're exactly, it doesn't have the authority to execute on everything we're talking about.
Okay.
But the White House does, the executive branch does, and the president does. And so it will be as it should be. It will be a decision of the president on what he wants to do with these recommendations. The people being staffed into the positions. So the new head of OMB is very, has talked publicly about being very aligned with this. The new head of OPM is actually a partner of ours is going in there. He's very aligned with this. And so the executive branch will have the execution capability to be able to do this, but it's at the president's deference, and we'll see what happens.
But from what you have seen on your many visits to Mar-a-Lago, this has the personal interest and support of the president-elect of the United States.
Yeah, he said so repeatedly. He was asked the other day, and he always gets asked, like, do you still support Elon? And he's at least so far 100% of the time, he's fully supportive. And so he's greenlit this. I mean, look, Elon has been living at Mar-a-Lago, right? They're doing this. And so look, I've full deference to the president. He'll do what he wants. This is there. Let me give you one more thing on this, though, and this goes to what's happening more broadly in the environment. And this is one of the reasons why you have all this panic now about the decensorship of the internet. Is that you'll recall? So I'm sure the Grace Commission tried to explain to the public what was happening with federal spending. I know Al Gore tried to. He went on Letterman and tried to articulate it. Ross Perot at one point was trying to do it with the flip charts and all these things. But we had a Senator Proxmire out of Wisconsin for a long time.
Of course.
Had the Golden Fleece Award. He would come out every year with like the crazy spending things. But it was always like when Proxmire used to do it, it was always like, it's just like 2 minutes once a year on NBC News. Of course, what does Elon have and what does Vivek have and what do the rest of us have now is we now have the ability to actually ventilate this information in public. Right, we have the ability to actually show and demonstrate this and actually expose this to the public view on both sides. Number one, here's all the stupid stuff. Like, here's all the stuff that clearly just like you're being taken for a ride on, right? And then the other side is, by the way, with corresponding cuts, here's the money that's being saved that's going back, into the taxpayer pocket. And so there's PR is it's beyond PR. It's not PR anymore because PR kind of implies you're going through the press. Those days are over. This is going to be direct interaction with the public. And
Mark, we've just been through a decade now in which we were told again and again and again that Donald John Trump represents a danger to democracy.
Yes.
You are describing a renewal of
democracy.
democracy.
Yes, 100%. Clearly.
All right.
100%.
Okay, I just wanted to check.
Yes. Yes, and this will be the key. I just as an observer, I say this will ultimately be the key. The key ultimately is going to be the direct relationship of the president with the people. Like that is ultimately going to be the key. And if the people are on board with the president, if the people are on board with the president has tremendous power. That gives the president the ability to get a lot of what he wants done through Congress. If the president doesn't have the support of the people, Congress can roll him arbitrarily. And so, Reagan knew this. By the way, FDR knew this. Like all the good presidents knew this. Trump 100% knows this, and he does this every day, and he's going to.
If you can bring the country with you, you can go anywhere.
Yeah, that's right.
18 months ago, you published a 5,000-word essay called the Techno-Optimist Manifesto. Let me quote you. We are told that technology takes our jobs, reduces our wages, increases inequality, and is ever on the verge of ruining everything. But our civilization was built on technology. Technology is the glory of human ambition and achievement, the spearhead of progress, and the realization of our potential. It is time, once again, to raise the technology flag. Okay. Apart from anything else, there are not a lot of people in Silicon Valley who write as well as that.
There we go.
I'd like to ask how we raise the technology flag with regard to several specific issues. But first, I just want to circle back to the president-elect. Mm-hmm. He's 78 years old. He grew up in an old-fashioned borough of New York, Queens. He made his start in his career in bricks and mortar. This is a man who made his money by pouring concrete. Does he understand technology? Does he feel it the way you feel it? And it would be good enough if he simply said, there's something important here. I may be not quite the right generation or quite the right background to get it, but I'll let Andreessen and Musk handle it for me.
Yeah, so
where are we with this?
I'd say the following. My analysis would be he is world-class on real estate and on communications. And those are sort of his foundational skills. And those are, he's world-class on both, which is like probably the first person in the world to be world-class in both of those things, right? The real estate industry is not historically known for its great communicators. Here you've got somebody who does both of those things incredibly well. He, as a consequence of his knowledge of real estate, and by the way, his also involvement in the communications industry, where he was, one of the huge winners of the last 20 years with what he did, with The Apprentice, which is a very large business. He very, very deeply understands business. And, as you know, one of the questions always, in Washington is like, wow, there's a lot of lawyers running around, and wow, there are very few people here who have actually held a job in the private sector, and there are very few people here who have ever actually run a company or been responsible to investors or had customers, right? And so he is also one of the most successful business people, of our time. So, I would say those are like three very powerful skills. Okay. And then I think what you learn, especially when you're good at real estate and when you're generally good at business, as he is, I think you learn how to do, what we call systems thinking. Like you have to. I mean, these large real estate. I mean, my father-in-law was sort of a Trump, kind of generational peer in real estate. And
John Arriaga.
Yes. And like talking to John, like when John put up one of these towers or one of these campuses, or when Trump put up, one of these giant hotels or whatever, like these are large-scale systems projects. Yes, like there's many dimensions. There's many things that can go wrong. There's a lot of things that have to line up. There's huge management complexity to it. By the way, there is technology change because you've got all these things coming at you, and solar, and all these new things coming in, and all these requirements. And you got to like manage these. One of the things these guys, my father-in-law always told me, and Trump clearly was the same way, is you got to manage these things hands-on because they can always go sideways. And any given day, you're sitting there bleeding out money if people aren't doing the right thing. And so they're good. He's very good, I think, world-class at thinking things through systematically. And we were talking before about there's this video going around today of him talking about the water situation in California.
Yes.
On Joe Rogan, what was that, 6 months ago or whatever.
I said, why did you have no water? Because the water isn't allowed to flow down.
And at the time, this is one of those classic Trump things where at the time everybody's like, why is he going on and on about the water situation in California? And then, of course, in the last 3 days, as we talk, LA is burning down. And if you listen to what he talked about with the water situation in California, it's like, yeah, that's all correct. Like, he is exactly 100% correct. He did the same thing, by the way, if you remember, in the first term when he diagnosed the German energy situation.
Yes.
To the face of the German diplomatic corps at the United Nations.
You people are going to become dependent on Russia, and that will be a disaster for you. And it has been.
And it has been. And if you go back and if you forget who did it, or if you just read the transcript and you read it, you're just like, wow, that was a really good it was an extremely precise and accurate and very prescient 5-minute analysis of this systems problem, which is where's the energy coming from, how's it going, what's going to happen here, what happens if we turn off nuclear, same thing in California, what happens to the water and this and that, and the whole thing. And so he's like really good at wrapping his head around these things. I would say at energy, this is the other thing is he's now obviously been president for 4 years, and so he learned about things to enormous depth. And so I'm not an energy guy, but my energy conversation with him, he's extremely sophisticated. The energy people I know that he's sophisticated. So he wraps his head around these things, I think, very quickly and easily. And so I don't expect of him that he's going to be coding, large language models in his spare time. But I think he's extremely capable of being able to understand these things, and I think actually does quite well.
Okay, so let's go. You mentioned energy several times there. Let's go to raising the technology flag on energy, nuclear energy. A quarter of a century ago, there were 104 nuclear plants operating in the United States. Today, there are just 94. And the average age of a nuclear plant in the United States is 42 years.
Yeah.
How does the techno-optimist respond to that fact set?
So this is the great tragedy of the domestic policies of the Nixon administration, right? So
Of the Nixon
of the
administration.
Nixon administration.
All right.
So Richard Nixon, Richard Nixon saw the energy crisis coming, and it developed in his second term, started getting underway. And he announced something he called Project Independence. And he said, this is ridiculous. We can't be running on fossil fuels from the Middle East. This is crazy. It's entangling us in all this, crazy foreign stuff. Like, we need to stop. We're the United States. We can power ourselves. And so,
On which he was correct.
yes, of course, he's completely correct. He declared Project Independence. Project Independence was we're going to build 1,000 new nuclear power plants in the United States by the year 2000 and go completely independent. So we're going to cut the entire grid over to nuclear production, electrical consumption, by the way, corollary, electric cars. And so, and by the way, green, like corollary, no more carbon emissions, right? We're going to have 1,000 nuclear plants, no carbon emissions, completely green. Nuclear plants put out water with a small amount of easily contained waste. But we're going to build those, and we were building nuclear power plants, as in the 50s, 60s, 70s. But by the 70s, we started to have these new technologies like computers, where you could see a way to build much more efficient
Yes.
and much safer plants, right? And so he announced that, and then he created the Environmental Protection Agency, and he created the Nuclear Regulatory Commission,
Which shut down which shut down a project which, had it gone forward, would
Yes.
have changed everything.
yes, and those agencies prevented Project Independence from happening.
Okay, so I think this is a brilliant stroke, and that is because it occurred to me, my own little head, in the middle of the night one night. I was tossing and turning and thought, hey, wait a minute. And here's the hey, wait a minute. The first nuclear submarine was commissioned in 1955.
Right.
Which means that the United States of America, which has nuclear-powered vessels of all kinds, has been building and operating small nuclear reactors for 6 and 7 decades.
Yes. Right.
And has the systems down so well that these things can be operated by 19-year-old kids who haven't even finished their high school degree.
Yeah.
And the technology is owned by the American taxpayers.
Yes.
Why aren't we using this?
Where are they? So, as you know,
And by the way, the military is exempt from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
right. So
Okay.
they just do it. And,
So is there not a huge opportunity there?
and as you know, literally what they do is they take 19-year-old kids and they train them on how to be nuclear engineers.
Yes.
And then they send them out on 6-month whatever.
Underwater.
Operating,
And there has, as far as I'm aware, there's never been a nuclear incident.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other amazing thing about that, by the way, it was pre-DEI.
Of course.
Like, just imagine how amazing it is, given everything we know today, that you could actually do this without the enormous benefits of DEI. Imagine what you could do with DEI.
Now you're being subversive.
quite possibly. Anyway, so the more serious part, in those days, as you know, they also because they knew they could do them in subs, and so therefore they just assumed that they would also do them for airplanes. Right, they were nuclear powered airplanes.
That I did not.
You remember the Tom Swift novels?
That I remember.
Yes, I'm reading them with my 9-year-old, and it's the very first Tom Swift. There's multiple generations. Tom Swift, boy inventor, and there's
Right.
these novels basically for kids. They were like the Harry Potter of the time or something. But there's this great series from the 50s with the second generation Tom Swift, and they're great. And it's like, Tom Swift invents this and that. He invents all these things, and and then has adventures based on them. And so they're very exciting books. But the very first book is Tom Swift and his Flying Lab, and of course the Flying Lab is a triple-decker 747 thing with this vertical takeoff and landing powered by its own nuclear power plant.
I see.
And you just assumed, of course you put a nuclear, and if you put, by the way, a nuclear plant in a plane, of course you could have a 747 that takes off vertically. And by the way, they in the book they literally take the thing up to like 30,000 feet and they just park it and they just hang in midair and hover for 3 hours and have lunch.
Which you can do.
If you have your own unlimited power. And so this is it. And by the way, this technology is for people concerned about carbon emissions. This technology is the silver bullet.
It is.
Yes.
Is the general feeling, my general feeling, correct? that if we unleash technology, we use the free market, we use the government, what the government has already discovered, an intelligent, that there are all kinds of problems we already know how to solve.
We totally know how to do this. And to your point, most of the nuclear plants that we have today are now 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. We know how to build much better versions of
course
those.
Yes.
Like we know how to build much more sophisticated versions of this. And by the way, so do the Japanese and others. And so the new plants would be much better than the old plants. They would be much safer. We know exactly how to do this. My devious plan is we should reincarnate Project Independence. We should build 1,000 new civilian plants. We should do the Nixon plan, cut everything over. But here's my way to get it done politically, which is we give Charles Koch the contract. And the reason is because it accomplishes everybody's goals. He would do it.
You'd better give us 2 sentences on who Charles Koch is.
Charles Koch, so people know the Koch brothers was always a misnomer. I mean, there were brothers, but really it was when people think about the Koch brothers.
Charles Koch was the businessman of the brothers.
The genius of the family, and is the guy who ran still runs Koch Industries, which is one of the largest companies in the country, one of the largest private companies in the world.
And stands out in American business history, as I recall, I think I have this correct, that Charles Koch and his brothers inherited a successful but modest company from their father and built it into a company which last time I checked had revenues of, well, I don't know whether it was revenues or market. It's a company that's worth $100 billion. I believe that that's correct as of a few years ago, and did it without ever borrowing a penny.
That's right.
They did it entirely on reinvesting profits.
And they reinvest by doctrine. Under Charles's leadership, they reinvest 90% of profits every year.
Okay, so why is he going to be interested in nuclear?
By the way, I don't know what it's worth, but I suspect it's
bigger than that.
It's very large. I think it's very large and very successful.
All right,
if it were to go public, But yeah, look, I mean, Charles is one of the, number one, Charles is one of the genius businessmen, industrialists of our time. He also became, of course, a major force in politics. He and the Koch brothers got tarred with this, they're fascist Nazis, even though, as you probably know, Charles is a libertarian.
Yes.
He's a libertarian free market guy. He's a Millet. He and Millet basically have sort of identical politics. Milton Friedman, he's a libertarian.
I've interviewed him on this program.
Yeah, and by the way, also just a wonderful human being, really, warm and genuine, incredibly open, wonderful guy. So my idea is you give him the contract to do it because number one, he'd do a great job because it's one of the best, industrialists in the world, right. And then two is he would win because Koch Industries would, be rebuilding the power system for the U.S. and then the Democrats would win because they'd make Charles Koch care about climate change, and not just that, but actually solve it. All right. And so everybody would get both what they most hate and most want. Now, when I have floated this idea in Washington up until now, I haven't gotten a lot of takers, but maybe it's time to bring it up again.
Mark, I'm going to try to extend this theme of problems we already know how to solve, if the techno-optimists are permitted to address the problem. Right. And that is, now this is a flyer, I don't know that I'm right, that's the border.
Oh, yeah.
During the Biden administration, Customs Services recorded 11 million encounters, releasing about 2.5 million into the country to await processing. The government also admits some 2 million gotaways. So that makes, by the government's own admission, at least 4.5 million illegal entries into the United States during the 4 years of the Biden administration. Okay. On top of which I note that as far as I can tell, Donald Trump in his first term only built 80 original miles of border wall. He refurbished wall and strength, but set all that aside, don't we have ground sensors, drones we can put up? Of course it lies within the ken of the United States of America to control its own border using the technology that we already possess. Am I wrong about this?
Well, let me tell the story of this company called Anduril.
Anduril. Which you've invested in?
Which we've invested in. Okay, so the founder of Anduril is this super genius, real-life Tony Stark kind of character, the Howard Hughes of our time. Real-life Iron Man named Palmer Luckey.
Palmer Luckey.
Who's this super genius from Orange County. And we knew him really well because he was the founder of Oculus, which is the VR company that then Meta bought. We were investors in that. And so he's got two giant wins in a row here. And basically he used the money from Oculus to basically start Anduril with a bunch of his partners. And they launched the company in when the Trump stuff in 2016 reached like white hot criticality, and everybody was going like completely bananas. Palmer shows up and he's like, "Oh, I know how to solve the border problem. We do basically mesh networks with sensor towers on the border, and then with drones, doing oversight, and then we do what's called sensor fusion, where you have all these different dispersed sensors, and then you bring them together on a single screen." And then you can tag individual people and you can watch them come across, and you can use it for.
If there's a problem, you can send in the personnel to solve it.
Yeah, exactly. Or by the way, you can send in a drone, right?
A drone.
And look, like the border. For anybody who works in the border, what they'll tell you is, look, like there's one thing which is border enforcement, and there's a lot of questions around what to do with that. But the other is like people get in real trouble on the border.
Yes.
And they're dying.
They're dying
They're starvation and like thirst, heat stroke, and so forth. And so like
with a drone, you can find somebody who's in trouble and help them.
And bring them water, or by the way, the other problem is child trafficking, and
Yes,
so
of
like, it's like, how about let's get eyes on a potential child trafficking. If there's like 2 adults and 20 kids, okay, let's get eyes on that so that we're ready, so we can go get the kids, right? And so so obviously you want to know what's happening, but this literally was like right in the teeth of the build a wall kind of moment. And so Palmer comes in and pitches us and goes through the whole thing, and literally it's just like, oh my God, this is like the genius of all time. We have to invest in this company, and his business plan is to use technology to hunt Mexicans on the southern border in 2016. And we're just like, oh God, like, we just like basically have a heart attack. And to our discredit, we flinch and we don't make the investment. Andrew goes on, and actually it's interesting. Andrew was actually not very successful in that program under Trump, because it turns out Trump, being a real estate developer,
he wants a
physical
wall.
wall guy, he actually wants a wall. Okay. And by the way, still does. And I think this time he'll get it, because now he knows how to do it. But as you know, he ran into a lot of roadblocks in the first term. Still built quite a bit, but hit roadblocks anyway. So Palmer's like, all right, fine, like whatever. And so what he started doing is he took that technology and he used it to start building defensive systems for the military. And so, for example, you have a military base in the middle of nowhere in Afghanistan or whatever, and you have all these potential threats coming at you, and you have the exact same problem. You have perimeter security problem. And so they started deploying sensor networks and sensor fusion and drones and all these things to be able to defend military bases. And then one of the most amazing things I've ever seen happened, which is, and Palmer was in the Valley was like a pariah, right? He was like excoriated. He was like constantly being smeared and slandered for being a horrible fascist Nazi, like being like the worst person imaginable, like all this stuff. And then this like incredibly, and he couldn't get invited to industry conferences, and people just said all these horrible things. The day Putin invaded Ukraine, the political valence went 180 degrees in a day, and Palmer became a hero of every liberal in Silicon Valley. Because now Andrew is going to, there's 2 things that we know. There's 2 things every good American liberal knows. We absolutely must not defend the American southern border, and we absolutely must defend the Ukrainian border.
Yes.
We must, right? the whole Ukrainian border, right? And Andrew in that time had become a very successful company, and by the way, it was doing increasingly sophisticated defensive military systems, and by the way, now is actually doing offensive military systems. It's actually up to and including like full weapon systems. And so it became all of a sudden that technology became super relevant to the Ukraine situation. As you know, the Ukrainian battlefield has been a revolution in military technology.
Yes.
With the drone stuff, and so like all of Palmer's theories are coming true.
Ukrainian kids operating drones shut down the Russian Navy in the Black Sea.
That's right.
Is an astonishing achievement.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they take out these main battle tanks.
Which brings me to, if I may, just again your feel for it. If I'm still with the Techno-Optimist Manifesto, this notion of raising the technology flag. Another problem, we may not have it. It's larger. It's more emotional, but in this administration, is Donald Trump, is DOGE, is somebody saying, get me a Palmer Luckey as Deputy Secretary of Defense. We have to, or here again, this is Robinson's little way of thinking of it. Extremely elementary, but it goes like this. The Chinese outnumber us, and they always will. The Chinese have a big enough economy to spend what they want to on defense now. And by many counts, they've already got more surface vessels than we have. They're working on submarines, on it goes. Our only sustainable advantage over the Chinese, our only sustainable advantage is going to be technological innovation. And so we have to have a Pentagon that knows how to move quickly on innovation and somehow or other is able to overcome the cultural divide between straight-laced colonels who run the requisition programs and the Palmer Luckeys of the world who build their companies wearing Hawaiian shirts and Converse sneakers. But we ought to be able to do that.
Yeah, so that you may know the guy going in is Deputy Secretary of Defense, so number 2, who's like the Chief Operating Officer for the Pentagon, is Steve Feinberg.
I don't know.
Oh, sorry. So Steve Feinberg was the longtime head of Cerberus Capital Management, so he's one of the world's leading private equity.
So he's already on this.
He's already on this, and then he ran actually the.
This is the most good news I've had at this table in a long, long time.
He's great. He's great. So
Okay.
this is probably. I think he is. I mean, look, and they've had people. Ash Carter who passed away, was a friend of mine. They've had good people in there, but like I think Steve is probably the best person in that role since actually David Packard, who was in that role, I believe. Okay. And Steve is like an incredible operator and very aware of these things and very steeped in this world. Okay. He ran the Presidential Intelligence Advisory Board in the first Trump term and is kind of fully integrated in. And then I would just tell you, like, without naming names of people who haven't been announced, but a lot of very smart people are putting up their hands and going in.
Excellent.
And by the way, to your point, like this is a great example. Like the issues are just starting. Right, so the Ukrainian battlefield is a revolution. By the way, there's also like all kinds of, unfortunately, Ukraine being the tragedy that it is, people are learning a lot. The nature of war is changing. Unfortunately, the same thing's happening with Israel and Gaza. There's a lot is being learned. This is what happened.
I can't remember who some famous general said, war is a test to see who can learn faster.
So the military is one of these amazing things where in peacetime they're training and they're preparing and they have all these theories, but they're not being tested.
Correct.
They don't have customers. Right. There's no mark to market in peacetime. You don't know.
Right.
When you know, unfortunately, is when you go to war, and that's when all the learning happens. And so there's learning happening there, learning happening in Ukraine. There's learning happening in Israel and Gaza. And then if something kicks off with China, there will be very rapid learning very fast. I would just pose to you a challenge into the system is like for example, it's not clear sitting here today with what we know. It's not clear that like surface naval vessels are actually useful.
Correct.
Right? Because like
somebody has to figure this out.
Exactly. And like aircraft carriers are open. Like there's a bunch. There are entire military doctrines of not just us but many other players. That
I asked someone I probably shouldn't name because he doesn't. I don't know whether this was in confidence. I asked a former admiral the other day, if shooting begins over Taiwan, how close can American aircraft carriers get? And he said, American aircraft carriers must stay 1,000 miles away from any hostile activity. The Chinese have already pushed the surface perimeter out 1,000 miles. Anyway, to your point.
And then hypersonics
Exactly.
are coming, and then drones are coming.
Exactly.
And we're at the very. This is why it's very important that these people be good. To your point, the drone thing is just at the very beginning, because like the Ukraine stuff, it's primarily there's a lot of hobbyist drones and there's these low-end drones, but like the drones are going to get very sophisticated, and they're going to get manufactured in much higher quantities. And so every time you see a drone today, just think of that actually being 1,000 drones. Right, and then you have all So there's going to be this massive. So what does even a naval destroyer do against 1,000 incoming drones that are all armed with bombs big enough to like blow a hole in the side of it? You mentioned Ukraine. Ukraine, I think, has been weaponizing jet skis.
Jet skis.
Jet skis. I think that was part of the attack they did on the Russian surface fleet. Was they turned commercial jet skis into drone bombs. Okay. And so there's all it's a long conversation we had about there's all kinds of ways to win here, but like these questions all have to be looked at. The entire system needs to get adapted. Being a democracy, we have trouble getting in front of these things.
Which brings me to I have a few sort of last questions for you, Mark.
Sure.
And for the first couple, let me play devil's advocate. You, Elon, Vivek, David Sachs, you guys are all acting from the highest motives, but I'm playing devil's advocate here. You're moving very fast. Sure. You're really moving fast. Those federal workers whose jobs we want to eliminate, they all have mortgage payments. They all have families. All of this technology, there are winners and losers. I mean, I'm perfectly open to the argument that over time technology creates jobs. But when Uber came along, taxi drivers lost their jobs. And now self-driving vehicles are the next wave, and Uber drivers are going to be in trouble. Okay, so all that said, here's another brief video. And this also comes from the interview I did all those years ago with Milton Friedman. But listen to Milton Friedman.
Okay, Milton Friedman, if you are made dictator for one day, the next day the American government...
No, I don't want to be made dictator.
You wouldn't?
I don't believe in dictators.
Okay.
I believe we want to bring about change by the agreement of the citizens. I don't believe in arbitrary rule.
Let me put it this way then.
If
proposal,
we can't persuade the public that it's desirable to do these things, we have no right to impose them, even if we had the power to do it.
If we cannot persuade our fellow citizens to support changes, we have no right to make those changes. Are you and Elon and Vivek and David Sachs, are the DOGE boys down with the political program of engaging in persuasion and bringing your fellow citizens with you day by day by day as all of this goes forward?
So I want to check myself out of this a little bit.
You're an unpaid intern, I know.
I appreciate you keep trying to rope me in a position of formal authority and power here, but again, I want to stress both parts of that, unpaid and intern.
All right.
So I'm not signing up for what you're saying myself. I will say, look, I think Elon is a world-class communicator, obviously. Vivek is a world-class communicator, obviously. Trump is maybe the best communicator of our time. And so they'll do. I'm highly confident that the three of them, in whatever combination, whatever form that they decide, they're going to be able to do it. Can I just go back to your thing though on technology change, unemployment, because this is the thing. So it's you probably know this. Economists, there is actually a way to measure the pace of technology change in the economy. There's a way to measure it and put a number on it, and with related to everything, both the positives and negatives of technology change, including job replacement. And it's
Is this Paul Romer's
productivity growth. Paul did a lot of work around this, but the basic economic concept is productivity growth.
All right.
And productivity growth is a measure. It's the quantitative measure of technology change. There's a few other things that lump in, but fundamentally it's about technology change. And really, what it is it's a metric for how quickly an economy year over year is able to produce more output with less input, right? And you can go either way on that, but fundamentally that's the lever. And if technology can't, just the thought experiment, if technology can't be used to produce more output with less input, like what's the point, right? If it's not good at like bringing down jobs, or bringing down costs and increasing free spending power and increasing demand in the economy, then what's the point, right? It's just a game or something, right? And so productivity growth is the metric that captures the actual impact, and productivity growth therefore is the metric that captures, for example, the downstream impact on employment, either for good or for bad.
Right.
Another pop quiz. Have we been if you look at the sweep of American history and sort of history of capitalism, history of Western capitalism, have in the last 50 years, we've been living in an era of high productivity growth, which is to say an area of furious technological change and future shock and, oh my God, look at all these amazing things and what an impact they're having. Or have we been living in an area actually of historically low productivity growth with very little progress?
Our friend Peter Thiel has persuaded me that it's the latter.
It's the latter. Well, it's for sure.
It is the latter.
It's for sure the latter because it's in the number. You can see it in the numbers.
It's demonstrable.
It's demonstrable. And so, and specifically what happened is basically between there's a long backstory here, but basically in recent history, between call it 1920 and 1970, that 50-year arc, productivity growth throughout the economy moved much faster, was 2 or 3 times higher. And then basically starting around the time I was born, right around 1971, basically it took a permanent downshift and it never recovered. And it wobbles a little bit during recessions. It ticks up a little bit because people get more efficient, but it's basically been generationally low now for 2 generations. And so
the whole game.
Yeah.
Excuse me. This comes to a question I was about to ask. When Ronald Reagan, again of that morning again in America, when Ronald Reagan took office, federal debt, the total federal debt as a proportion of GDP was about 32%.
Right.
Today, 126%.
Right.
The whole game
Yeah.
is going to be getting productivity growth up, correct?
You have to. Well, so you have to exactly. So you have to get productivity growth up because that's where economic growth comes from. Productivity growth is what causes economic growth.
Right.
The reason productivity growth causes economic growth is because if you can generate more with less, then you can take things today that cost $100 and then you can get them instead for $90, $80, $70, $60, and then the consumer or the business has additional spending power that they can use to buy new things. That is the mechanism of economic growth. Like
Right.
that is the actual mechanism for why economies grow or whether they don't grow. If productivity growth goes to zero, there is no growth. There is no economic growth. If productivity growth is high, you will have lots of job transformations. You will have lots of jobs being created and destroyed, but you will have a growing economy. And you will have basically an economic heyday in which there's opportunity everywhere. And people will look at it. And you've seen, there have been times like this. The mid-90s had a little bit of this. You remember, like, when there's a surge of economic growth, everybody, like, gets really cheerful. Well, that's as a consequence of productivity growth.
That morning again in America, what happened was that by 1983,
Right.
the stock market started to recover, and by 84, the economy itself is starting to grow and grow really briskly. I think 84, 85, the number was up to 6% for something like 8 months.
Right.
So
if you care about
people felt it.
That's right. And so if you care about the country and if you care about the people of the country, what you want is growth. You want economic growth. In order to get economic growth, you need productivity growth. things are going to change, but you're going to have the growth such that people are optimistic and see lots of opportunity for themselves and for their children. The enemy is not technology-driven unemployment. The enemy is no growth. The enemy is no growth. The enemy is to end up where the UK and Germany and Canada have worked themselves into, which is no growth. Because what happens, and then you think about the translation from economics to politics, what happens
People start ripping themselves apart, ripping their countries apart.
Zero-sum politics.
Yes,
if you have
yes,
zero-sum
yes.
economics with no growth, you have to have zero-sum politics, because the only way for anybody to get anything is to take it away from somebody else. In a high-growth environment, you have positive-sum economics, which means you have positive-sum politics. You have a sense of possibility and opportunity, right, and awakening and growth and excitement, right? And people are like, wow, this is fantastic, and I can't believe all the opportunities, and I can't believe how fast my standard of living is advancing, and I can't believe the jobs that are opening up to my kids. And so if we got, this is where the narrative on this goes so sideways, if we got what people think is the apocalyptic nightmare of rapid technological change, which is to say rapid productivity growth, we would have a boom economy like you've never seen, and we would have people be the happiest they've ever been in their entire lives. Like, that is precisely what we should be going for. And by the way, anybody who's listening to this who's concerned about either left-wing populism or right-wing populism, this is the answer.
Right.
This is how you defang populism. The way you defang populism is you grow.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat the question that I asked at the very beginning, but this time a little more seriously. As I said a moment ago, when Reagan took office and worked those changes, federal debt was only 26% of GDP, and now it's 122%. I correct myself. Excuse me, I think it was 32%, now it's 122%. In 1980, our adversary was the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was bad and dangerous. It had nuclear weapons, but its economy was essentially negligible. Throughout the entire Cold War, I looked this up the other day, throughout almost the entire Cold War, the number of Soviets who studied in the United States was just 50,000. China, there are 250,000 students, Chinese nationals, studying in this country right now. Your friend Elon Musk sold 650,000 Teslas in China last year. A single factory, it's really a city, a single factory produced almost all of the 218 million, if I recall, iPhones that Apple sold around the world last year. We can't live without China in some way. People will attack me for putting it that baldly, but this is going to be a trick.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's more formidable than the Soviet Union was. So I put it to you, we are in some ways in worse shape, more polarized as a country. The federal government has metastasized, as you said. We're deeper in debt. We're facing a more formidable opponent in China. Do you really believe we can pull it off? Is there a chance for a national renewal?
Well, let me say first, both of those problems are even worse than you presented. So, as you're probably aware, the national debt is growing at a pace of $1 trillion per 100 days. And so this is one of the things of the, this problem has been building for a while, but these last 4 years, like whatever governors were there before just like got completely taken off. And so we've been spending money like it's going out of fashion. So, $1 trillion every 100 days. Yeah, Thomas Massey, who's like, one of the only libertarian members of Congress, he's an MIT engineer, really brilliant guy, and he made himself a lapel debt clock counter, right? And so when you talk to Thomas, it's worrying the increase in the national debt. And last time I talked to him, he said he needs to re-engineer it because we're at whatever 37 trillion, and we're adding another trillion every 100 days, and the pace of adding, because of the compounding, the pace of adding is accelerating. So it's going to be 90 days, 80 days, 70 days, and so he says
interest payments now exceed the Pentagon budget.
Correct, exactly, and there's no upper bound on where they can go. And of course, this is the classic cycle that you can get into, which is the more that compounds, the higher rates rise, the more you're starving the real economy, right? And then you get in this cascade where there's as various economies discover repeatedly in the world, and we've discovered in the past, you can get in these spirals that are really bad on interest rates and inflation. So Thomas's challenge for, I think, over the holidays was to re-engineer this clock to add another digit, so that it's going to keep working when it hits 100 trillion. So like that train is like moving, and we could have a long conversation about the legislative process has really broken down with these giant omnibus kind of bills that get dumped on people's desk the day before they're supposed to leave, 1,500 pages with 12 hours to read and process that you have to vote on, or literally they tell you you're killing sick children and all this stuff. And so like this is like a very big. Speaking of the DOGE, this is like a very big problem. Right. And then look, the China thing. The problem is compounding, and I'll just tell you where I'm worried right now, where the problem is compounding. So you mentioned like the sort of iPhone assembly, and that's a big deal. But basically, there's 3 industries that sort of follow phones that are kicking in right now. So one is drones. And it's sort of in a bizarre turn of events, the Chinese basically own the global drone market, all basically the consumer drones, all the cheap drones, which, by the way, numerically then are the drones that all the militaries also use in overwhelming numbers. And something over 90% of all drones used by the U.S. military are made in China. And the thing is, it's not just a company. It's
Could you get to the cheery part, please?
No. It gets worse. It gets worse. It gets worse before it gets better. So the drone thing is not just a company; it's an entire ecosystem. So it's all of the componentry. We have a drone company that's been trying to compete with the Chinese company. Mm-hmm. Number one, the Biden FAA has been trying to kill us this entire time. It's trying to do all kinds of things to make sure that American drone companies can't succeed as part of their war on tech. So something it's like literally just another in the long list of ways that they've been just trying to absolutely kill us. But 2 is China has figured this out. And so the US has been sanctioning AI chips going to China. China is now they sanction our drone company for the battery. Because the battery's made in China, right? And so they have like significant leverage, not just for the drones, but for the entire supply chain.
They have cards to play.
They have cards to play. By the way, the drone supply chain is very analogous to the car supply chain. It's a lot of the same kinds. A self-driving electric car is very similar to a drone, or for that matter, to an iPhone. It's an electrical mechanical device, but it's a lot of the same kind of battery technology, chip technology, sensor technology. So they now have they now have their version of what the Germans used to have, which is the sort of the thousands of mid-market companies that make all the parts that go into a car. But the German ecosystem is still making them for old internal combustion cars. The Chinese ecosystem is making them for electric cars and self-driving cars. And of course, that means the new Chinese cars that are coming out are really good, and they have a giant advantage on cost. And they are starting to bring to market cars that are equivalent in quality to Western cars at a third or a fourth the price. So that's coming. And then the big one that follows phones, drones, and cars logically is robots. And so we are on the verge of the actual robotics revolution that we've all seen in science fiction, read science fiction stories forever.
And the Chinese are ahead of us there?
Oh, 100%. Now we have the leading, but this is important. We have the leading software, like we have the leading R&D. Like we have the smartest. I'm convinced we have like the smartest robotics AI people. We have a bunch of companies.
We still have the best people.
We have the best people specifically for the design of the systems, but we don't have anything resembling the manufacturing capability at all, including, and again, it's not just whether a company can build a robot, it's whether you have the thousands of companies that make all the components that go into robots. An example, you've seen these videos of the Boston Dynamics robot dog.
Yes.
And you can, they're not a very aggressive company going to market. Those are like $50,000 products, and you can go buy one. China has an equivalent product that, by the way, looks extremely similar and behaves extremely similar, and has among its capabilities, it can climb stairs, it can do backflips, it can stand on its hind legs, it can climb, and descend inclines. You can put wheels on it. It can shoot at like 30 miles an hour. It can lock the wheels and climb stairs with the wheels on. By the way, it also is hooked into a large language model, so it talks to you in a very nice, in a very, very plummy voice. It will teach you quantum physics, full voice control. Price point, $1,500. Right? Now,
Cheer me up.
So this is all coming, but okay. So step one is clarity, right? And then, by the way, everything we've just been talking about is also upstream from all the military applications, right? Because it's that same supply chain that then goes into everything we talked about in the military. And so, like I just say, this is like a very fundamental thing that we have to confront. And having this very fragmented approach where we on Tuesdays hate the domestic American technology industry and are trying to kill it, and on Thursdays think we're going to somehow develop some sort of competitive response to China on cars or on weapons in the future. Like there has been no coherence. Another one of my favorite questions to ask in Washington is, okay, what's the whole of government strategy on technology? Of course, right? Zero. What's the whole of government strategy on China? Zero, right? It turns out the president matters. And so, this is precisely why this all matters so much. Like, this has to be directly confronted. We and our companies are enthusiastic at signing up to solve these problems.
And the president
we need a government that wants to work with us in this.
Donald John Trump is alive to all of this.
Yes, 100%, no question. And he is, and then his people are. And this stuff they understand.
Mark, would you close our conversation by reading this excerpt from your essay, The Techno-Optimist Manifesto?
Love to. We believe in the romance of technology, of industry, the romance. The eros of the train, the car, the electric light, the skyscraper, the microchip, the neural network, the rocket, the split atom. We believe in adventure, undertaking the hero's journey, rebelling against the status quo, mapping uncharted territory, conquering dragons, and bringing home the spoils for our community. We believe that we have been and will always be the masters of technology, not mastered by technology. This is a really key point today. Victim mentality is a curse in every domain of life, including in our relationship with technology. Both unnecessary and self-defeating, we are not victims, we are conquerors. We believe America and her allies should be strong and not weak. Economic, cultural, and military strength flow from technological strength. A technologically strong America is a force for good in a dangerous world. We believe in greatness.
Marc Andreessen, thank you very much.
Peter, a pleasure.
For the Hoover Institution and Fox Nation, I'm Peter Robinson. Thank you for joining us.